Good afternoon, everyone. Buenas tardes. My name is Ricardo Perez. I am professor of anthropology and coordinator of the Latin American and Caribbean Studies here at Eastern Connecticut State University. And I want to thank everyone for being here this afternoon for the University Hour presentation of the week, Energy Generation and Democracy in Puerto Rico. For me, it's really an honor to introduce our speaker this afternoon and welcome all of you to her presentation. On September 20th, 2017, Hurricane Maria made landfall in the southeast coast of Puerto Rico, causing innumerable deaths and great devastation of an already crippled economy. Among other things, the catastrophe that followed exposed the lack of maintenance to the electric grid and the lack of environmental planning. The main stations supplying energy for Puerto Rico's Electric Power Authority caused disproportionate environmental harms to the communities near those power stations. Residents are concerned with the likelihood that electric companies will not support the necessary changes, such as energy demand management programs, promotion of ratepayer energy efficiency, and renewable energy generation and storage. Today's presentation will emphasize that the proposed recovery plan should support efforts to transform Puerto Rico's grid with rooftop solar communities that pool available resources to operate as microgrids. For the past year, many of us have followed closely the news about the long recovery process ahead in many communities across the island, especially in the southeast coast where Hurricane Maria made landfall. We are fortunate this afternoon to have Ms. Ruth Santiago, a well-known and respected resident of Salinas, a municipality in the southeastern coast of the island. Ms. Santiago's commitment with community development in the region has led her to work with community and environmental organizations, fishermen's associations, and other groups for over 30 years on projects ranging from publishing a community newspaper to developing ecotourism and rooftop solar energy pilot projects. She has helped establish broad alliances to prevent water pollution from landfills, power plant emissions and discharges, and coal combustion residual waste. In addition to litigation in courts and administrative agencies, Ms. Santiago has organized and promoted environmental education projects, advised community groups, and the Hobos Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve on watershed protection and land use issues. Most recently, she has worked on cases related to energy projects and integrated resource plans. Ms. Santiago earned degrees from Lehigh University and Columbia Law School and has published articles on energy issues in Puerto Rico. She is the recipient of the 2018 Sierra Club's Robert Buehler Environmental Justice Award, and in 2013 was Clean Air Ambassador during the second 50 States United for a Healthy Air event. In essence, we are thrilled to have Ruth Santiago present her viewpoint on the recovery efforts on the island after Hurricane Maria. Before I ask her to address the audience this afternoon, I'd like to take some time to acknowledge the people and the institutions that have made this event possible. And there have been a few people and institutions involved. I just want to start by acknowledging the support of the University Hour Committee in funding this program, the co-sponsorship of the Latin American and Caribbean Studies Program, the Intercultural Center, especially Sarchimar Byron and her student ambassadors, the Institute for Sustainable Energy, Lynn Stoddard. Here also at Eastern, the Office of University Relations, Media Services, which in fact is videotaping this presentation this afternoon. I also want to acknowledge the fact that Ruth Santiago is here in Eastern Connecticut, invited by the Yukon Institute of Human Rights. And I want to acknowledge Professor Samuel Martinez, Professor of Anthropology and also the Director of El Instituto at Yukon, for bringing Ruth to Willimantic, and also my colleague and good friend, Hilda Llorens, who is a professor of anthropology at the University of Rhode Island. All of them have helped bring Ruth Santiago and spend some time this week doing other events and workshops at Yukon. So here at Eastern, Ruth Santiago will be actually presenting a public speaking engagement this time. Who else I have? I think that's pretty much what I wanted to say. Before I ask her again to speak, I want to make a quick reminder that after she speaks, there will be hopefully ample time for the audience to make questions or ask or comments. There is a microphone on the corner of the theater, and I will encourage people asking questions or making comments to use the microphone. And finally, on the table, there is an attendance sheet, and I would like to ask not just students, but everyone to sign their names, because we would like to have an idea of how many people have come in support of this event this afternoon. So without any further ado, please join me in welcoming Ruth Santiago to Eastern Connecticut State University.
Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you to all the people and institutions that made this meeting possible and the series of activities we'll be having here in Connecticut this week. So I hope that I've piqued your interest with that title about what on earth could energy generation have to do with democracy, right? So I'm going to leave you with that for a while, actually, while I read an article that I wrote providing some background information on the situation in Puerto Rico. And I'd like to say also, before I start with the article, as we all know, the devastation in Puerto Rico as a consequence of the passage of Hurricane Maria, but things that were happening way before that, structural things, and the whole economic and underlying social crisis, fiscal crisis that Puerto Rico has been undergoing for a long time, and the actual collapse of the economic model, the development model in Puerto Rico that's been in process for decades. So all of that, after Hurricane Maria, of course, became pretty much life-threatening situation for a lot of people. And thanks to lots of people here in Connecticut and throughout the U.S. especially, and the diaspora, Puerto Rican diaspora in Connecticut, I think we can say that lives were saved as a result of lots of people's activism and work. So I thank all of you who've participated in that. I call this part of the presentation the necessary transformation of the Puerto Rico grid. And so this is sort of in a reflection on 1 year after, right? So more than a year after Hurricane Maria, Puerto Rico is still depending on unreliable transmission lines that transport energy from large central station fossil fuel plants in the southern part of the island through the central mountain range and tropical forests to the load centers in the San Juan metropolitan area in northern Puerto Rico, rather than rooftop solar communities, energy efficiency and demand response programs, as well as energy storage. And I'll show you what I mean with this in the presentation in a little while. The transmission lines are frail and subject to constant breakdowns, like the failures that have caused multiple blackouts since the hurricane, leaving tens of thousands of households in Puerto Rico without power for hours or days. Various large power outages, like the 2 in April of this year, were due to transmission line failures that tripped the whole or a substantial part of the grid. The 2 big Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority power plants, which are the Aguirre Power Complex and the Costa Sur, and the 2 private power generators, which are Ecoelectrica and Applied Energy Systems Corporation, are all located in southern Puerto Rico and transmit power to the northern part of the island, especially to the San Juan metro area, using transmission lines that might not hold up in the next hurricane. Furthermore, the Aguirre complex and the AES coal burning power plant are the two primary sources of toxic emissions in Puerto Rico and disproportionately impact some of the poorest communities in the southeastern part of the island. And those of you who are familiar with environmental justice issues know that those are the two main criteria. Furthermore, the AES coal burning power plant in Guayama, which transmits electricity to the San Juan metro area, accumulates hundreds of thousands of tons of coal ash waste at its plant site that have already contaminated part of the South Coast aquifer, the sole source of potable water for tens of thousands of people in Puerto Rico. Continued reliance on these plants for energy transmission to San Juan is another disaster in the making. The frequent power outages, primarily due to transmission failures, are compounded by choppy telecommunications services. Dropped calls and slow and scanty internet service are a common occurrence, in spite of the fact that the big telecommunications providers charge hefty fees for deficient service. And that's as of today. I'm not talking about last year after the hurricane. I'm talking about, even today, that's the problem. So many people believe that the high death toll, estimated at between 2,975 to 4,645 and maybe even more, associated with Hurricane Maria, is attributable to the lack of electric service to power life-saving medical equipment. The elderly are especially vulnerable during power outages, and Puerto Rico's population is growing increasingly older as working-age people flee in droves, some of them coming here to Connecticut, of course, in search of job opportunities that could be locally available, with a swift transition to rooftop solar communities and other alternatives to central station fossil fuel generation and long-distance transmission. Some people have started to move to rooftop solar because these installations held up very well during the hurricanes and didn't require fuel or much maintenance. The experience with diesel and gas generators in the aftermath of the hurricanes was plagued by fuel shortages, toxic emissions, and machinery breakdowns. The Association of Renewable Energy Contractors and Consultants, ACONER, for its Spanish acronym, indicates that they are installing 5 to 6 times more rooftop photovoltaic equipment with battery energy storage systems than they were prior to Hurricane Maria. Scattered throughout Puerto Rico, a few organized communities, rural aqueduct projects, individual homeowners, small-scale farmers, and others are installing or planning to install solar energy systems. In Salinas, for example, a community group called Junta Comunitaria del Poblado Coqui and Iniciativa de Ecodesarrollo de Bahía de Jobos, with which I collaborate, are running a pilot rooftop solar project from a community center and are training local youth on energy issues and plan to expand into a solar community. Many of the existing community energy initiatives have been focused in remote areas or environmental justice communities, which have been disproportionately impacted by fossil fuel generation. Although valuable, this approach will have a limited impact towards meeting the stated goals of augmenting renewable energy generation in Puerto Rico. Compliance with the existing renewable portfolio standard, what is known as the RPS, and the more ambitious targets recently announced by the government, foundations, think tanks, and other stakeholders require assertive measures and widespread community participation. The advantages of clean energy generation at or close to the point of consumption, or otherwise known as rooftop solar, are many. They include the use of existing sprawling housing development rooftops to avoid further impacts to open spaces, something very important on an island with limited geographic space. Impacts to open spaces, agricultural land, and ecologically sensitive areas. Rooftop solar eliminates the need for large investment in transmission infrastructure. It avoids transmission losses, grid maintenance costs are reduced, and impacts to forests and vegetation as a result of tree cutting and pruning are minimized. The rooftop solar alternative doesn't require establishing extensive easements or servitudes on private property. It helps to lower temperatures within the structures and provides protection to the buildings. Rooftop solar installations add value to the structures and promotes local wealth. All of this, of course, some of this applies locally here as well, right, in Connecticut and elsewhere. Distributed generation on rooftops creates greater reinvestment in local economy than, for example, utility scale projects. It enables ratepayers to become producers or prosumers, which is the term being used now, of energy, not mere consumers, and allows for control by residents and local communities, which is particularly important during outages of the main grid, as was experienced after Hurricane Maria. Rooftop solar enjoys broad support among civil society, contrary to land-based installations that have been the subject of considerable opposition. Currently, this is incredible, 98 to 97% of electric energy generation in Puerto Rico is from fossil fuel combustion. So that means obviously that only 2 to 3% comes from renewables. Not nearly achieving, what is called the renewable portfolio standard established by law in Puerto Rico and in many other jurisdictions. Historically, the Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority, known as PREPA, has made huge outlays of funds, up to $3 billion per year. It ranges from $1 to $3 billion, but can get as high as $3, for fossil fuel purchases and payments under power purchase operation agreements. So that's money that flees the island immediately. The oil and coal and natural gas burned by PREPA and the 2 private electric energy plants in Puerto Rico is sourced from wells and mines that are far from the island, which increase the cost of energy generation. The long economic and fiscal crisis in Puerto Rico is in part due to the high oil prices. It is no coincidence that the Puerto Rico Oversight Management and Economic Recovery Act, known as PROMESA, emphasizes energy as a prime area for critical projects that would be fast-tracked. Puerto Rico is also in the throes of a social crisis due in part to the highest inequality levels in the Western Hemisphere, according to the Gini Index. Even after the hurricanes, federal funding has not alleviated high poverty rates. The Center for a New Economy recently released a report that indicates that 90% of the obligated federal funds are going to mainland U.S. companies. There is a generalized consensus that Puerto Rico must move to integrate substantial amounts of renewable energy and other alternatives to fossil fuel electric generation, even more so after Hurricane Maria. One lesson hopefully learned from the hurricane is the realization that Puerto Rico is located in the Caribbean, the continent of islands that is part of a well-known historical hurricane corridor. The human suffering and deaths associated with the hurricane, the lack of maintenance to the electric grid, as well as other structural problems and deficiencies in disaster planning have been immense. The vertical transmission poles, towers, and cable lines crossing the central mountain range and forests from the electric plants in southern Puerto Rico to the demand centers in the north demonstrate a design lacking in durability and resiliency against hurricanes. In the aftermath of Hurricane Maria, the generalized lack of electric power from the grid and the grid-dependent PV systems that did not operate it independently of the network forced Puerto Ricans to create alternatives to energize their residences and other facilities. Although the government of Puerto Rico has announced an ambitious renewable energy goal, the actual allocation of funds for energy spending is going more towards hardening, the so-called hardening the transmission system that would still be vulnerable to hurricane-force winds, diesel generators, and conversion of existing plants to burn natural gas and related infrastructure. Earlier this year, PREPA issued a request for proposals for, for an energy project for the Puerto Rico island municipalities of Vieques and Culebra that seems tailored for diesel-powered generators and rules out the possibility of rooftop solar communities that would be especially well-suited to the small islands. Subsequently, Siemens Industries, working as a consultant for PREPA, issued a preliminary integrated resource plan that would establish a roadmap for the Puerto Rico grid that would virtually crucify the island with extensive and expensive natural gas infrastructure, including a natural gas pipeline running from southwestern Puerto Rico to San Juan and 4 liquefied natural gas ports. The proposed Puerto Rico recovery plan should support efforts to transform the Puerto Rico grid with rooftop solar communities that pool available resources to operate as microgrids with the ability to connect and disconnect from the larger grid, along with energy demand management, efficiency programs, and other alternatives as proposed in our Queremos Sol platform, We Want Sun, and you can go to our website, queremosolpr.com. A group of us, civil society groups have gotten together to put forth our own proposal about what the future grid in Puerto Rico should look like. Puerto Rico needs to jumpstart rooftop solar communities in a concerted effort that must be led by civil society groups, and that's what we're doing, hopefully. Many people fear that Puerto Rico's energy grid, and especially the transmission lines, will not withstand the next hurricane, which could be any day now. So that's the presentation. And so now I think we can go to the presentation and see some of the visual aspects of what I was referring to in the article. All right, so this is basically what we saw all over Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria, this or worse. And according to the experts, like faculty at the University of Puerto Rico at Mayagüez, which is the engineering campus in Puerto Rico, 80% of the transmission and distribution systems were down or damaged in some way, and estimated 50,000 poles, 500 transmission towers, according to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, that have knocked out 100% of the power. There were also communications failures because lots of the poles have lines related to the communications networks. And we became known, I mean, this, I think, was the New York Times, started to call Puerto Rico Generator Island because people had small generators, those who could afford, had small fossil fuel generators that were generalized throughout the island. Like every block had one or two or three, depending on the affluence of the neighborhood. And the noise levels, the diesel fumes, the contamination were just unbearable. The lines to buy fuel were an everyday occurrence, long lines. And as I mentioned, the death toll related in one way or another to the hurricane, the official estimate that was revised after quite an ordeal is 2,975 and could be a lot more according to other experts. Okay, so this is a map of the hurricanes that have come through, the historical depiction of hurricanes that have come through. If you look at the red line, that looks very similar to the route of Hurricane Maria, and most of them you can see come in through the southeast towards the northwest, I mean, generally speaking. So this is a map of the grid, and what you can notice here is what I was saying about transmission, right? So we have, although the numbers indicate the power generation. I don't know if you can see that, but so the big plants you can see are in southeastern and southwestern Puerto Rico, and then there are some, there is some generation in the north, but as you can see, it's a lot less, and so those blue lines are the big voltage, high voltage transmission, and the red are somewhat lower, and the 38 are among the lowest transmission lines. And any of you who have been to Puerto Rico, of course, know that San Juan is in the north. And so that trajectory for those transmission lines, they're in the way of the hurricane route, right? And so that's what went down. And it wasn't so much the plants that were affected, it wasn't generation as much as these lines. So they couldn't connect from the south to the north to provide energy. So hopefully the lessons learned, I mentioned in the article, more or less these lessons, but I think the last one is the one we need to focus on. There's this narrative, generalized narrative, that electricity, energy, all of these things are too technical, sophisticated, and difficult for communities to get involved in. And one of the things we learned as a result of the hurricane and the lack of maintenance and the austerity and the crisis at PREPA and in Puerto Rico prior to the hurricane is that communities need to participate in electric power generation and other issues, and they can. So I mentioned a little bit about what the government proposals are, which we think are not very sustainable. And it's important to say that although the Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority is a public corporation, it is, I would say, a captured public corporation. So while initially, or in its inception, it might have been geared towards universal service and electrification of the island. As time has elapsed, it's become more and more an instrument of political parties, of coal and oil and natural gas interests. And I think you all know something about that here as well. And so lately, as a result of the what we might call the shock doctrine as applied to Puerto Rico, we have Law 120 passed in June of this year, which proposes the sale of the PREPA generation plants to private companies, and long-term concessions of the transmission and distribution systems, which we are sure, if this comes to pass, will perpetuate fossil fuel generation in Puerto Rico, because logic tells you that private companies who invest in buying these things or invest in any kind of improvements will want to get hefty returns on their investments, and will keep these things going for as long as possible, rather than allow for a transformation of the grid, especially from community-based. And so the whole process has been done with a lack of transparency and participation. Just this morning, I was reading the proposed legislation for the new energy public policy in Puerto Rico, and the Senate has only scheduled one day of hearings. And this is something that would impact the future of the island in a very big way, and merits a lot more public participation. And as part of the austerity measures that are being implemented even prior to the hurricane, we're having government elimination of agencies and protections and services to the communities. And I think all of you know about the school closings and the hospital closings, and just total underserved community that exists in Puerto Rico. And you probably have all heard of the Puerto Rico Oversight Management and Economic Stability Act, otherwise known as PROMESA, which was prior to the hurricane, but certainly has compounded the problems for any kind of recuperation or recovery from the hurricane, because of all of the cuts, all of the austerity measures that are being required under this law. And so, and also that it promotes the so-called critical projects that would be private based generation projects, and primarily certainly not community-based renewable energy projects. So this is a view of some of the projects that are being proposed by the government and the big gas interests. Any of you who know the history of Puerto Rico, there have been 3 previous attempts to do big natural gas projects. Like, basically, the plan is, according to Ron Bishop, Congressman Ron Bishop, is to make Puerto Rico the energy hub for the Caribbean using fracked gas from the U.S. These are the things we oppose. We are not in favor of this for many, many reasons. And I guess, rather than talk a lot about the resistance to this, we'll go to going beyond resistance and what our proposals are. So we think our proposals are much more transformative, and that there's a great opportunity to do this because you probably know that Puerto Rico, within the U.S. jurisdiction as a territory of the United States, has the second highest electricity rates in the nation, second only to Hawaii. And there's a thing about islands, right? Energy generation on islands is a very different thing from energy in a continent, right? There are lots of complications in terms of the physical infrastructure, about the availability of these fossil fuels. They're not here on the islands, and so they would have to be transported, and they have to be, natural gas, for example, is super complicated because it needs to be transported in a liquefied form and then re-vaporized when it arrives at its destination, and those costs and that infrastructure is very expensive, and it also has more toxic emissions related to it because, there's this myth out there about doing natural gas as a bridge fuel and being cleaner than, say, coal or oil. But in an island context especially, that is so not true, because the actual revaporization and the maintaining the LNG in its liquefied form has a whole set of additional emissions, toxic emissions, in addition to burning the natural gas at the plants. So that's why there have been different initiatives, like the municipalities, the municipal governments are, especially after the hurricane, bringing together volunteers and PREPA retirees and anyone willing to help to electrify their communities, and why throughout the island, the different groups are proposing solar communities and microgrids, and which would be either close to or at the point of use, that is on the rooftops. We have huge rooftop resources in Puerto Rico. The University of Puerto Rico faculty about a decade ago did a study called the Achievable Renewable Energy Targets, and indicated that using 65% of the rooftops in Puerto Rico, we could generate 100% of the energy we need. And that was back in 2009 when energy demand was much higher. And so we have the possibility that communities and ratepayers can be active participants in energy generation and become prosumers, not just passive consumers. And even if they don't totally disconnect from the grid, right? So they can do some of their own generation, but still be connected to the grid. And you can see more of that in the proposal, and that's the website. And one of the groups that I work with most is a project called Coqui Solar in a community called El Coqui in Salinas. And this community is, I guess, the prime example of environmental justice or injustice in Puerto Rico. Just 2 days ago, the major circulation newspaper published the fact that about 34% of all toxic emissions in Puerto Rico are in these Hobos Bay communities because of the two big plants that are there, the big PREPA complex, Aguirre complex, and the AES, Applied Energy Systems coal burning power plant. And so, communities sort of in response to that have said, and much prior to the hurricane, we're working on this Coqui Solar project, but it's picked up a lot of speed after the hurricanes, and there's much more social acceptance now of these concepts and these proposals. The coordination is happening. There's the pilot project at the community center is underway, and there are many reasons why we're doing this project, not just a technological fix, right? We're not substituting one technology for another and that's it. We're trying to transform the way we relate to energy. We're trying to keep working age people, especially youth, to stay in the community and build our future in the community. And ultimately, our goal is to achieve energy democracy. We're doing a lot of energy literacy work that is understanding what the different aspects of generation and how we can be more efficient, how we can conserve more, how we can have incentives for daytime use as opposed to the nighttime peak, all of these kinds of things, and achieve a measure of participation that would, with the goal of energy democracy. So this is one of the reasons why rooftop solar is a viable option in Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is an island with lots of water. The Taino Indians were attracted by the water on that island in particular. And so we have lots of flooding, and especially with poor planning, right? So we have a lot of poor planning too, and a lot of sprawling developments called urbanizaciones that provide at least a rooftop resource that we can use to energize the communities. This is, I'm sorry to say, this is a little bit dated because our energy mix is now somewhat different. We have now much more natural gas, or, well, let's say about 40% more natural gas combustion, and a little bit less of the bunker C fuel oil, which is like the tar, like burning tar with all the problems that entails. And we have still that amount of coal and maybe a little more renewables, not because there have been so many new installations, but because as the demand goes down and people have left, I mean, the estimate, I think now is about net 175,000 people left after the hurricane. So energy demand goes down with that. So this is the implications of the Applied Energy Systems coal-burning power plant, which incredibly is a coal plant that was established in Puerto Rico at the dawn of the 21st century. And it's supposed to be the clean coal type of technology. Has anyone heard of that? It's a fluidized bed combustion coal plant that was built and put in operation in November 2002. Unfortunately, with a 25-year power purchase agreement. So it's due to expire in 2027, but it has been a very problematic installation. It is one of only 2 plants in U.S. jurisdiction that has no disposal facility for its coal ash waste. And because the company alleged that all of this gray material that you see in the front of the slide where the child is playing, that would all be a beneficial product. That is actually, those of you who I've heard that some of you are environmental studies majors or biology, you know that when coal burns, what's left over are the heavy metals. The metals don't burn, right? So this is a concentration of heavy metals. And you could just go through the list of heavy metals and you'll find them there, and also radioactive isotopes. So not a good thing. It's actually a big problem here in the States that's becoming more visible. And so much for cheap energy. Okie doke. And this is a GasPort that would have impacted. I mean, it's still on the books, but hopefully it won't get done. And these are the resources that would be impacted. These are real pictures. This is not, anything I got out of some commercial site. This is the real place. And so this is an illustration of what was done to electrify Puerto Rico, and this is what had to be redone after the hurricane. And so it's a formidable feat. Puerto Rico is a volcanic island. And, the topography is very irregular. And what I say in closing is, if we did this, we can transform the grid. So with that, I'll open it up for questions.
Thank you for coming tonight, Attorney Santiago. In confronting the company AES and the injustices that they've caused the communities of Salinas, Guayama, and Peñuelas, what has been the biggest challenge?
Yeah. I've heard, I was at a meeting in Mexico City on Latin American groups that are doing anti-coal work, and actually AES has a presence in about 40 countries. It's a monster, and it does have all kinds of generation, right? So they, and they are saying that supposedly they're not going to build any more coal plants. But in Chile, they have, I think, about 4 coal-burning power plants. And the word there, the activists in Chile say that AES prides itself on saying that it will continue operations even in the face of stiff community opposition. So, many challenges. One is that obviously it's a company with enormous resources, has incredible influence on politicians in Puerto Rico. It's a very, very long story. But we can talk at any point, maybe. But so that's certainly one aspect. But also the way that the company divides the community by providing, sort of buying people off by offering sports teams uniforms and indicating that they provide the cheapest energy on the island, and so many barriers, many obstacles, many challenges. But supposedly in this legislation that we're considering now, the senators are indicating that they will not renew the contract. We're actually requesting that they not only not renew the contract, that they determine that it has already been violated. It's been breached by AES because of the contamination of the aquifer, because of this coal ash fiasco, those kinds of things. Thank you.
Attorney Santiago, thank you very much. When Hurricane Maria came through, there were 2 politicians from Puerto Rico who appeared on American television a great deal. One was, I believe, the governor of the island, and the other was the mayor of San Juan. One of those politicians was a incredible kiss-up and to the American president, and the other was very vociferous in her support of the people and demand for justice. And without saying which was which, so try and keep this even-handed.
The woman was right.
Yes. So the question is, how are these 2 people involved? And more generally, it seems like the politicians themselves are perhaps some of them are questionable in their support of the people of the island. I wish you'd comment on that.
Okay. So this is the governor's proposal, right? This is what I call crucifying Puerto Rico with natural gas infrastructure and delaying or totally impeding investments in the transformation towards renewable energy and energy demand management and efficiency and conservation. Puerto Rico, if it invests in all of this, and with ratepayers already paying the second highest rates, there will not be an opportunity to do a real transformation anytime soon. So that's the governor's position. He is trying to get federal funding to do these kinds of things. So we need you all to contact your senators, your congresspeople, and let them know that this is not the way to go for Puerto Rico, right? And we know that there are people here who are already doing that. With respect to the mayor, Carmen Yulín Cruz, I think absolutely right. She was, said people are dying before anyone realized, officially recognized what was happening. So that was a very important call to action. And I've heard her also say that she'd like for to see more renewable energy on the island as well. I hope that answers your question.
No, I just wanted to find out that when you say everyone needs to get involved, are you talking about funding, like the money? Because there were a lot of donations, and we were told that it wasn't being distributed to the people in the islands. when we are talking about the people that live deep in the country as well. So I would like to know what's going on in the countryside.
Yeah. Okay, so, yeah, there were serious problems with the distribution of food and water and other basic things for basic necessities. It was very complicated because, on the one hand, it had to do with, say, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers taking control of the port of San Juan, and that held things up in a strange way. But also the fact that the government just didn't have a plan. And I mean, so in fairness, almost category 5 hurricane, it's hard to have a real adequate plan. But there's so many things that led up to this. Many people refer to this as an unnatural disaster in spite of the fact that it was a hurricane, because say if we had had a different type of grid, or if we'd had some maintenance to the grid, or if we had people participating, everyone getting involved, this is not new. For over a decade we've been working for renewable energy, and the problem in Puerto Rico is one of democracy, right? It's like people are not allowed to participate. And now people are sort of demanding more participation. And so what was successful in terms of the donations that were made is at the community level. I mean, I know that those things reached the people that needed the help in Utuado, in the central mountain area, and other rural and distant communities. I'm not sure if that addresses your question, or do you want something?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to know what happened with everyone's donations, because a lot of people donated. So to know that Puerto Rico still says, oh, there's not enough funding. And I understand you're talking about people, the resources to protect the island and so on. But I mean, I just wanted to know, how much more do you need? How much more money? Because I understand that they're in crisis as well. They owe a lot of money, so.
Yeah, okay, so.
I stay here all day, but I'm not.
Okay, so there's, for example, there's a calculation by one of the faculty members at UPR, Mario Huez, that and it's in our proposal, that he indicates that in order to transform the grid, for example, in a sort of from a community based effort, the investment would be $300 to $360 million per year for about 10 years to make a big impact in the grid and change it from what it is now. Now, I think you're also asking how much of the funds that were donated or the things actually reached the community. I'm not sure I'm the right person to answer that, but there were cases where things didn't, like there was the recent discovery of like millions of bottles of water that were not made available, that were just left on a landing strip in eastern Puerto Rico. I don't know. I haven't heard a valid explanation for that. So I'm not sure I can answer that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. My question was about the rooftop and community solar, and you mentioned battery storage. Do currently, so that 2 to 3% that's your renewable energy right now, is that storage battery that's stored off the grid? And I'm just curious, in Connecticut, the battery storage is an expensive component, so not many solar installations on homes have that. And do you see that as a barrier, or the price of energy being so high, maybe not? How do you get that transition to getting off the grid altogether?
Right. Okay, yeah. So that 2 to 3% was really like prior to the hurricane. Right now, I'm not sure that anyone has an actual number. I mean, I know this Association of Renewable Energy Contractors, they're saying they're doing 5 to 6 times the installations that they were doing before the hurricane, and with batteries. Everybody wants batteries now. And as you say, that's the expensive part, the more expensive part of the installation. And yet, not everyone, well, obviously, almost no one in Puerto Rico with a poverty rate of almost 50%, almost no one in Puerto Rico can afford Tesla Powerwalls, right? But people are innovating and using marine batteries and regular car batteries. Believe it or not, it's really interesting what people are doing and bringing down the prices quite a bit. And the price of installations in Puerto Rico is much lower than it is in the States. So as you say, I've heard Lazard published a study last year, the financial firm, indicating that what is happening now with the prices of batteries or energy storage systems is what had happened with solar panels in the previous years. They're coming down. So it's making it more and more viable. And especially if you couple that with energy efficiency, if you couple that with conservation, if you couple that with incentives for daytime use and avoid the nighttime peak, you can get pretty far with that.
Are there incentive dollars for residents for solar and storage right now?
No. There was what was known as a green energy fund that never had much money in it, and certainly now it doesn't. This new legislation supposedly provides for some funding for that.
Hey there. So you spoke about obviously like renewable energies, and you just mentioned like Tesla Powerwall and stuff like that. So I was wondering, where do you think most of the funding for this should come from? I mean, like, I think it should come from like all sources, but like when you have like offers from like Elon Musk and stuff like that offering to come into Puerto Rico and try to reset the grid using renewables, using like Tesla Powerwalls and like solar powered systems units and stuff like that. Do you think most of it should be coming from like the federal government, from Puerto Rico's like local government, or like that system, or donations, or just what's your take? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Okay, that's a great question. Ultimately, I think funding will come from the ratepayers. The question is where the upfront investment is coming from, right? So as we know, usually, sort of on an individual level, homeowners who want to install this kind of equipment have to put up the money, right? And that can be financed, and there are companies that are actually doing leasing of this equipment. And so there are all kinds of options. And then there are very low-income people, of which, there are a lot in Puerto Rico. So what do you do in those cases, which are people who, by and large, pay their electric bills but can't get a loan necessarily to finance that kind of installation? In those cases, probably merit some kind of assistance, whether from federal funds or from foundations. Puerto Rico is a very densely populated place, in spite of the fact, that we've lost a lot of population since 2006. Over 500,000 people have left. And so there have been, like the Elon Musk example of providing the panels for the Children's Hospital and the storage systems for the Children's Hospital. Those are few and far between, and every energy company you can imagine is present in Puerto Rico trying to do business, because it's a great business. It's a very high energy rates that we pay, and it's a very high return on investment for these companies. So by and large, ratepayers pay this. How you finance it initially that's the trick.
So on the topic of transforming Puerto Rico's energy systems and helping it achieve more renewable energies to power the community sustainably, the Connecticut-Puerto Rican agenda, of which Jason over there and myself are a part of. We are putting on a fundraiser to solarize a health clinic in Corabo, Puerto Rico. We have a committee of people consisting of Brian Garcia from the Connecticut Green Bank, former Hartford Mayor Pedro Segarra, and a lovely bunch of individuals. And we're holding this fundraiser on November 16th at the Emmanuel Congregational Church in Hartford. I'll be in the back handing out flyers if you're interested. We have an Eventbrite that we can direct you to. So if you're not able to make the event yourself, please consider donating to this cause because this is the worst catastrophe to ever strike the island. And the promesa that is currently into effect in our government is already crippling enough. There's not enough money to adequately fund government services such as healthcare and education, and so it falls on us. It falls on those with a little more privilege to look at the bigger scheme of things and say, you know, let's give back. Let's transform Puerto Rico. Let's make it the island of the future because this is the time to rebuild. Attorney Santiago, I didn't mean to steal your thunder there, but this is very necessary planning that we have to put into effect. So mark your calendars, November 16th, Solar Saves Lives in Puerto Rico.
That's right.
And I'll pass some flyers out. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
So as folks here in stateside, you know, some of us are Puerto Rican and some of us are not, but what do you think is the role of the diaspora and the folks in the States in helping to rebuild Puerto Rico? Is it, you know, donations? Is it physically going to the island? What do you think we can do to actually help here?
All of the above. Yeah, well, I think one of the things, when Ricardo and I met, I think at the summit in Springfield, was it? Holyoke, right. That was a question that came up constantly. What does the diaspora do, or what do progressive people, community organizers and workers do? I think you work in your community, just what he said. And even if it were a project here in Connecticut, that is helpful to us because that is information that we can exchange. Those are experiences. We can keep those collaborations going and learn how to do these things. Community solar is a very new thing, and it's pretty revolutionary, as Arturo Masol would say. This is a revolution because if you think of it, this is not just a substitution of one technology for another. This is empowerment. This is empowering communities. It's, as he said, saving lives. And it's allowing people to control their energy use and their means of, in a sense, part of their means of production, right? They're able to produce. So what does the diaspora do? Lobby Congress and your politicians. Everybody says this, but believe me, we need a continuing waiver of the Stafford Act so that the funds from any federal funds that, whatever may come to Puerto Rico are allowed to be used for a transformation of the grid, not just rebuilding the same thing we have. Yep, that's my 2 cents.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
If you don't have any other questions, I just want to conclude today's event by thanking Ruth Santiago for that powerful and insightful presentation.